Welcome, welcome to 2021. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. I'm the Reverend Kerry Mueller, co-minister here with the Reverend Dave Hunter, and we are glad that you are with us, however and whenever you have arrived. Are there announcements this morning? Okay. The opening words. Welcome 2021. We have been waiting for you. We have been rushing towards you. We have been crawling towards you. We have been dreaming of your days, your themes, your events, your hopes. Welcome now as we bring you from dreams and begin to build your reality, to forge a world and a year that will be better for all people.
Okay, you have an announcement?
I have an announcement.
All right.
Okay. On Friday, February 8th, Fair Districts PA is putting on a seminar and a conversation at 7 o'clock at night. It's going to be posted on Facebook. Thank you, Erica. And we're just really excited about it because it's going to be a pretty good way to find out about what's happening in the Pennsylvania legislature, some of it not very good, and maybe what we can do about it. So 7 o'clock this Friday, yes, at on February 8th, January 8th, January 8th.
January.
Yes, exactly. I know what month we're in, but my mouth doesn't.
That's very important work.
Thank you.
Mary, they have told us to expect a dark winter. The weather is cold, the statistics grim. And yet the year has turned, the solstice is past, light shines longer. We light a chalice of renewal, a flame of hope for the years to come. May we all become shining beacons of hope. Thank you. Carly, will you play hymn number 57, All Beautiful the March of Days? Thank you, Carly. Well, this has been a year of sharp sorrows, cherished joys, looming anxieties, tiny moments expanded to become the emblems of our lives. Now is a time to share the joys and sorrows. The bowl of water holds our virtual community, and the stones I dropped will shimmer its surface and embody our connections. Does anyone have a joy or a sorrow to share this morning? Yes. Okay, you'll have to unmute yourself first.
I have a joy in that we had our second UUFP walking club yesterday. We had 13 adults and 2 children, and it was just really lovely. And it lasted from about 10 to 12, and we decided to meet the first Saturday of every month until we don't meet anymore. I don't know if that'll happen, but anyway, at Coventry Woods, and everybody is invited. I think it's February 6th at 10 o'clock at Coventry Woods.
Thank you so much, Kay.
Stone dropping show up on the screen.
It should. Are there others?
I just have to say, I like the phantom hand dropping the stones in the water.
He's here. He's here.
There you go.
I did it with my left hand too.
Impressive.
So let us remember to hold in our hearts the joys and the sorrows of all humanity, whether they are spoken and shared or silent and solitary. And though we are scattered and sequestered, our fellowship continues. There is electronic work coming to fruition in our sanctuary. We remain a living congregation. We take walks. We see each other on Zoom. Needs continue. Bills go on. Your support is as vital as ever. Carly will play number 55, Dark of Winter, while you have time to write a check or find the donate button. Carly, number 55. Thank you, Carly. Well, one day in the last week, my colleague Molly Brewer posted this. She said, "Has anyone written a vaccine blessing yet? I woke up with this one." And here's what she wrote and offered to share it with anyone. Blessed are you, vaccine, holy tool of science, medicine, and health, secretly, invisibly transforming pathogen to antigen, antigen to immunity. With each dose, be as anointing oil. Bless us each with strength and power to fight. No mere superstition are you, but the work of will, curative and creative, birthed by knowledge and observation and trial and error, the cumulated work of many minds, many hands, many hearts. Child of science and magic, bless us in turn. Grant us hardiness, grant us protection, grant us the will to persist against imperceptible onslaught. Do your secret work in our bodies and in our blood, as you did for our ancestors before us. With each moment, may you grow into your purpose of protecting those most susceptible, most vulnerable. Help us to recognize that you are no malefic potion, no plot or plan or scheme, but that you are the embodiment and creation of love for one another. That you represent the promise of many hands making light work. When each of us who can takes this tiny risk, the risk for many more divides and divides until one day it is gone. May the labor of those who created you be not in vain. May your promises grow to fulfillment. May each of us persist, resist, grow strong with your help. May our losses be eased. May we be inoculated from strife and trouble. Vaccine, work of many, child of many, blessed are you among balms. Has anyone here received any of the vaccine yet? I don't see anyone. We're not scheduled yet. So the sermon, if I can find it, is called 2020 Hindsight. It must have been in late February or early March. I had just finished what I would later recognize as several last times for an indefinite period. my last haircut, my last trip to Wegmans, which was crazier than any snow day I'd ever experienced. My last travel, we went to an URMAPA conference, that's the Unitarian Universalist Retired Ministers and Partners in Arizona. I might have gotten the cue there. I was a little concerned about plane travel. One of the conference attenders declined to shake hands with anyone. And when I returned, it was my last pottery class. And I was then very concerned that my teacher was going to Florida on an airplane. I found myself writing sympathetic emails to a relative sequestered in Milan. The title of the first sermon of 2021 came to me in a flash. 2020 hindsight. I had a vague, somewhat complacent idea that by New Year, whatever this might turn out to be, would be over, and we could look back philosophically on a strange time in our lives. I had forgotten that warning sign etched on the glass of the rearview wing mirror. Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. So here we are in early 2021, and things have evolved somewhat. There are glimmers of hope, but it's not over yet. Back in October, I preached about 4 major intertwined crises facing us: the climate crisis, threat to democracy, 400 years of racial injustice, and the COVID-19 pandemic, plus the economic fallout of each of them and the social upheavals and costs of facing up to them or not facing up to them. And they're all still with us with varying degrees of visibility and urgency. So in no particular order, let's look at climate first. This remains an existential threat to our familiar human civilizations, if not to the entire species itself. The outgoing administration continues to do as much damage as possible, whether because they are blindly favoring short-term business interests or intentionally harming the medium and long-term prospects of the economy and the chances of the next administration. I don't know. Sometimes I think that our deep-seated subconscious awareness of this catastrophe is creating a backwash of denialism and distraction seeking that exacerbates all the other crises. Over Christmas, I read a book called A Children's Bible, a novel by Lydia Millett, listed as one of the New York Times' 10 best of the year. And it's basically an extended parable of that essential conflict between generations on this issue, in which the adults are playing at eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, while the children, who know what they are facing in the long term, behave with foresight and responsibility. And meanwhile, 400 years of racial injustice has become 401 with no let up in sight. The terrible deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor are emblematic, exhausting, but not exhaustive. The street protests, all consuming for a time, are less visible for the moment because of winter weather or outrage fatigue or the endless distractions of the news cycle. I don't know. But the inequities of healthcare and nutrition and housing and daily life continue to illustrate the ongoing injustices. And likewise, the threats to democracy seem to have subsided for the moment. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice wrote in the New York Times that democracy has dodged a bullet and withstood the greatest stress test of our lifetimes. Presidential historian Michael Beschloss said on MSNBC that we have had a close call. I hope they're right. At every step of the constitutional process, Election Day, Certification Day, voting by the Electoral College, the media have said, Biden-Harris have won the election, it's over, again. But there's another step coming. January 6th, Tuesday, is when Congress tallies the Electoral College votes, and several congressmen and senators have promised to throw sand into the normally routine gears of that process. And rumors of violence continue to circulate on the web. And then comes Inauguration Day itself. I do expect that the Constitution will prevail, that there will be an orderly, peaceful transfer of power. But the threats are not gone. We still live in a divided reality with some 30% of voters believing that the election was somehow stolen, believing without evidence, but simply committed to accepting whatever their leader says. If the climate catastrophe is fueling mass anxiety, the mass anxiety that's making everything else worse, I believe that this reality divide is making it all but impossible to address any of these problems. And something else. The refusal to accept reality has its roots in a culture of grievance. Resentment and revenge are prioritized over relationship and problem solving. I thought it was telling that the person who apparently chose a Christmas Day bombing in Nashville to kill himself had posted a picture of himself wearing a pro-Trump hat. Now, not the familiar one offering to make America great, but just promising to make liberals cry. I've heard that idea before. It's not that we love him so much, it's that we hate you. A large portion of the electorate feels so dismissed and disrespected that they are willing to vote against their own interests and ready to burn the whole house down just to express their rage and despair. Now, the reasons for this are complex and beyond my understanding, and I don't think they're fully rational, but the future of democracy depends on working to heal that wound. And that is a challenge for all of us, whether we feel we have contributed to that problem or not. And then the pandemic. This has been the overwhelming experience of 2020, apparently coming out of the blue and yet affecting everyone one way or another. From the disruption of our daily lives to fears of losing our deepest relationships, to our sense of our place in the world and the shock of having the rug of normality being pulled out from beneath our feet. Now, perhaps the pandemic is the most transient of the four. After all, that vaccination process has begun, and yet it has undermined our confidence. It remains inextricably intertwined with the others. Climate change, globalism, migration, crowding, economic inequalities, all of these things make future pandemics more likely, including those that may be more virulent than COVID-19. Racial and economic injustice lead to distrust, which makes fighting the virus more difficult. The reality divide and the weakening of democracy weaken our ability to apply the findings of science. So as we look in the rearview mirror, it's too early to celebrate. Objects are closer than they appear. Our hands are on the steering wheel. What have we learned about ourselves and society? We might have hoped that a year of living monastically, sequestered and without the normal busyness, or more austere in our consumer habits and plenty of time for introspection, we might have hoped that all of that would lead to greater integrity, time for learning, spiritual insights, generosity, and kindness. We might have hoped to emerge more spiritually mature, enlightened. And I do believe that some of this has occurred. Facebook has a group called The Kindness Pandemic that shows stories of large and small acts of generosity. People buying the groceries for the person behind them in line, for instance. And here at Whitehorse Village, staff members have just done a terrific job and gone above and beyond. Some of them have brought supplies from home in order to be able to give haircuts to the residents of the nursing home who couldn't go to the salon. People all over, including a lot of you, have come to better appreciate the birds and the other wildlife that they now have time to notice. We've developed a greater awareness of the preciousness of life and the conveniences and comforts of the life that we have in the 21st century. Though I have to remind us all, that this we is mostly the people of privilege, the people who are safely at home with adequate income, able to order groceries from Instacart shoppers and art supplies for curbside delivery. For all too many of our fellows, that appreciation amounts to gratitude for a food line or temporary housing given just to reduce the exposure to the virus, or a bittersweet iPad farewell to a dying loved one, or hoping that the eviction moratorium should be extended. Life is precious. It is also precarious. We've seen the fragility of so much that we've come to take for granted. Now, as a child, I worried about nuclear war, but I never gave a thought to the near demise of democracy. I read dystopian novels with interest, not anxiety. In 5th grade, a classmate of mine was permanently disabled by polio. And a year or two later, I just lined up to receive the Salk vaccine. I didn't worry then about distribution planning or anti-vaxxers or even violence against healthcare workers. The life we have been living is dependent upon many factors: a livable climate, the institutions of democracy, a basic trust among citizens, a food distribution system, all kinds of physical and electronic infrastructure. And as a white person, I've never had to think about fearing the police or distrusting the justice system. All of these things turn out to be fragile or inequitably applied. And third, well, I could go on indefinitely, but 3 for now. We have learned that we are tougher, more resourceful, more resilient than we knew, always recognizing that some are simply crushed, that they die of an illness that had never been existing before, or benefits run out and they cannot keep their restaurant afloat or their employees employed, or they succumb to depression or a long-threatened addiction. And I hear that alcohol consumption is way up this year, especially among women. But for those who began this year with a reasonably secure foothold, it turns out that we can feel connected through Zoom, find new outlets in art making and nature and walking, figure out ways to support our kids to learn algebra, donate to charities, take part in online learning or book discussions, write memoirs, contribute to time capsules. We have been endlessly creative, recognizing the necessity of self-care, reviving and expanding our cooking skills and learning to bake, talking to our spouses in person and friends electronically. So we can be glad of the strengths of the human spirit, even in difficult circumstances. So now here we are, poised at the beginning of the next phase, the new normal. What are we finally done? When are we finally done with this year from hell, and what do we want to take with us? The most important thing that I hope to carry forward into 2021 is humility. Not humiliation, but the monastic humility that I talked about in November. The kind of humility that enables us to embrace new truths that we may not have seen before, or that come from an unexpected source. The kind of humility that helps us to let go of old fears and resentments and to move forward with new kindness towards our fellow citizens. The kind of humility that enables us to put the good of the wider community ahead of our own benefit when that is appropriate, and the wisdom to abandon what is sometimes a toxic individualism. The humility that may encourage us to work towards healing the political divide. I think of Senator Cory Booker in November calling for a civic revival of grace because democracy is hurting. And he went on to say that we need to stand our ground. I read him to mean that to adhere to our basic principles of justice, equity, and compassion, and at the same time to find out a way to reach out towards healing. That requires humility, and I would add that a genuine humility can help us to find the both and of passionate commitment and generous forbearance. Well, I was going to leave it there, but several days ago, I read a letter on Facebook from an educator in Voorhees, New York. I sent it to the board and some of the leaders. It was about how to think about reentry for our students. The letter suggested that instead of worrying about their being behind on standardized educational goals, we should embrace them, help them process the traumas of the time away, and appreciate what they have learned, because kids are always learning something. Now, that's not exactly what the letter said, but that's how I read it. And I think it applies across the board. All our community institutions, including our churches and fellowships, need to be thinking about how to welcome people back, how to help them process what they've experienced, and to preserve and apply the lessons of this year. In conversations with my family, I realized that I don't have any of the stories of how my parents and grandparents navigated the challenges of the 1918 flu pandemic, or World War I, or women's suffrage, or any of the great public events of their childhoods. So I'm thinking that we need to create the stories of this time, stories that will help a generation prepare to respond to the next great crisis and to guide generations beyond so that we do better. And third, not finally, because these challenges and skills and tools are really endless. Third, think we need to carry with us a great sense of commitment to social justice, commitment to a better world for our children and all humanity, and indeed to all the species that make up this lovely, fragile world. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think about what you might want to take forward, and I'll ask you afterwards. But let me sum up with these uplifting words of Stephen Colbert, who appeared briefly with Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen on CNN on New Year's Eve. He said, "You're really not alone. We have learned that we need each other so much. There's a need to collectively engage with each other, to take care of each other. One thing that COVID has taught us is that we cannot get through crises alone, and that this latest mountain we're all climbing, we have to do it together or there's no way to get over the top. That overt public need reminded us that we're never really alone. I hope we will take this to the other side of this moment. Pay attention to those people who don't have somebody to take care of them or somebody to be with them, because you might be that person in a moment. So may it be. Amen. Shalom, salam, and blessed be." After the benediction, I'll ask you to share with me some of your ideas about what you want to take with you. Christmas Eve, my colleague and the minister of my son and his family in Grafton, Massachusetts, Daniel Gregoire, used these words of Alfred Lord Tennyson as a benediction on Christmas Eve. They are suitable today as a New Year's meditation. They're the fuller version of hymn number 58 in our book. And after I read the slightly adapted words, Carly will play that familiar tune for us. It's called In Memoriam. Ring out wild bells to the wild sky, the flying cloud, the frosty light. The year is dying in the night. Ring out wild bells and let him die. Ring out the old, ring in the new. Ring happy bells across the snow. The year is going, let him go. Ring out the false, ring in the true. Ring out the grief that saps the mind. For those that here we see no more. Ring out the feud of rich and poor. Ring in redress to humankind. Ring out a slowly dying cause and ancient forms of party strife. Ring in the nobler modes of life with sweeter manners, purer laws. Ring out the want, the care, the sin, the faithless coldness of the times. Ring out my mournful rhymes, but ring the fuller minstrel in. Ring out false pride and place and blood, the civic slander and the spite. Ring in the love of truth and right. Ring in the love of common good. Ring out old shapes of foul disease. Ring out the narrowing lust of gold. Ring out the 1,000 wars of old. Ring in the 1,000 years of peace. Ring in the valiant one and free, the larger heart, the kindlier hand. Ring out the darkness of the land. Ring in the world that is to be. Carly, will you play number 58, please? Ring out wild bells. Thank you. Benediction are words from my colleague, Tom Shade. My friends, there is a power at work in the universe. It works through human hands, but it was not made by human hands. It is a creative, sustaining, and transforming power, and we can trust that power with our lives. It will sustain us whenever we take a stand on the side of love, whenever we take a stand for peace and justice, whenever we take a risk. Trust in that power. We are together, held by that power. Amen. Now I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond and to tell me what you would like to take with you into 2021. And I think to do that, you'll have to unmute.
So I'll offer the spirit of flexibility. Just kind of thinking about how we've learned different ways of working and different ways of having fun, different ways of keeping in touch with family this year, converting our home office to a classroom and our dining room to a mask sewing room. So, we could do some things a little differently, and just remembering that maybe being flexible and being different doesn't necessarily mean being worse.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I would say it's the creativity people have shown about how to do different things. And just like, you see on the web, the TikTok videos, just where people are trying to stay sane, that they're doing different and creative things. My creative outlet has been watching the Great Baking Show, and then coming up in Great British Baking Show, and then going, oh, I could try something like that. So I've been experimenting with flavors, and I have 15 pounds to show for it. So 2021 will be about losing those 15 pounds and then some. Or 2021, sorry.
You said it right.
I did understand you were talking. I actually called my cousin back in the summer, one of my older cousins, because my sister and I are the babies of the group, and said, did your mother, or did you ever remember because she knew our grandfather, who was a doctor, them ever talking about the pandemic of 1918? And the answer was no. And none of our parents, my sisters and my mother wasn't born yet, but it would be fascinating to know what Grandpa did and how he handled it as an MD.
That's really interesting. I have read in the past that stories about catastrophes are often not passed down in families because there's a sense of shame attached to them. So there are almost no family stories about the Irish famine because people just felt that it was hardship and not worth talking about. Family stories about slavery times are not often preserved for the same reason.
Yeah.
My father wrote an essay that was more or less an autobiography. And he just mentioned that his parents, when he was young, his parents moved a lot, and he never knew why. They moved like every year or two in New York City. But at one point they moved to Connecticut for a couple of years. And it was when he was little, and it was at the time of the pandemic. And he thinks possibly they did that to get away from the city, and possibly because he was considered delicate and they were trying to protect him. But that was just a hypothesis. Nobody ever talked about it.
Yeah, it's frustrating because it would be either talking about it, or if there would be old notes or diaries, or, we've found letters and various things, but not very much.
And there's some public sources, or people have done histories, but it seems to me that this is a time when we're in a good position to record information and should preserve the stories, because I think the stories are the way that future generations can understand how we responded and how they might respond to whatever comes up for them. I read something this week also about somebody who's created not a time capsule, but a way of preserving newspaper articles by transferring the print to form of porcelain, which apparently will last indefinitely, and keeping them in an old unused salt mine. So that may turn out to be more information for future archaeologists than all of our electronic devices, which will eventually go poof.
So the porcelain replaces the microfiche, which still has been considered the
Gold standard.
the better
Yeah.
choice,
Right.
in storage of
But I think
information.
it's much more expensive, so you wouldn't necessarily have as much of it.
Yeah.
We need little porcelain flash drives.
There we go.
Future
Yeah.
generations can worship porcelain in a whole new way.
Well, I sent that article to my pottery teacher because whenever I find anything about clay, I send it on to her because she's the person who will pass it on to future generations of students.
Did you see where there was a clay mudslide in Norway, I think?
No.
Yeah, it was a clay slide, I guess. And that's what that it just came into a town, and can't remember how many.
Was that the
It
one
was a couple of days ago, and I haven't seen an
I
update
remember
yet.
seeing that there was some kind of an avalanche that did damage but not kill anybody.
Yeah, it was clay.
Okay, there was also a snow avalanche in Iran this past week that killed 8 people, and it turned out one of them was a graduate had been a graduate student of my daughter's,
Wow.
and she was just distraught that we lost this person who was not only a brilliant scholar but also a really wonderful person. And this week she lost that student and also her Latin teacher from high school.
Oh,
And so there she was between the generations of loss.
Mm.
sad.
I had a takeaway from this year, and it's too bad Trish is off now because I kind of wanted to talk with her about it a little too. But just working with Trish on social justice has just brought me to feel an urgency to help to heal our democracy and get back to a better place. And I think about it quite a bit about national health care, equality in education, trying to get back to actual democracy, and just getting to a better place with our government. I just have the strongest feeling that so much of what has gone on has been the sort of the decay of the good government that we could have. So I have a sense of urgency about that, trying to help and trying to inspire others maybe to try to get better at make our democracy better.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much for that, because I think you're absolutely right. And I'm so glad that we have a locus of activity here that even separated and sequestered, we can be helpful in this regard. And I think it is not only urgent in itself, but it really would help us to deal with all the other problems.
All right.
And
I
I'm
just,
glad that you reached out to the mainline church, because they have folks too. And I think that would help them and us to work together.
well, I'm very thankful for Trish for helping us in our fellowship. And she just is an inspiration. She's a driving force. And I
That's-
never would have the courage to do anything but her pushing me to do it.
Well, that's really great. I'm glad to hear that. And I hope everyone tells her.
One of the questions I'm bringing into 2021 is, what is this resentment and this anger that I think perhaps has been exposed by trying to relieve voter suppression It's like in our system, everything's been okay as long as we could suppress a vote and keep people down. But now that that's being exposed and more people have a say, are voting, that this is a big threat, and that it's causing pain and fear in the people whose style or actions have been sort of covered up by systemic racism, and what we can do to lessen that pain and fear and anger that supports, a system that is hurtful to another group in society. I'm just wondering what can be done about those feelings of anger, and how did it happen and how can we undo it?
I had
I
this.
don't have the answer, obviously, but I think it's a really important question. And certainly part of it is the dramatic and now visible changes in the demographics of the country that will make people who thought they were just the default condition and on top are not really there anymore. And that is disturbing to people, just as many men had difficulty dealing with the women's movement in the 70s. That's coming out in a different way now. I don't know the easy solution either, but it's you put your finger on something important. And I think a related question that I just can't imagine how to answer is, why are some people so susceptible to conspiracy theories? What does that mean?
I had this thought related to those last two comments, trying to run a balance between standing one's ground, and especially for our leaders, the new leaders coming in, to stand our ground for justice and truth, to insist on justice and to insist that rocks fall down, not up. and not back off from that in a strong way, and at the same time understand and have compassion and try to communicate with those who are saying that rocks fall up. How do we stand our ground and have empathy at the same time, is a balance that I think I hope I could for myself figure out.
I
And
think
more importantly for our leaders, new leaders, to understand how to run that balance.
it's extremely important. And again, I don't know the right answer, but I've been thinking about that myself. I think that's what Cory Booker was referring to when he talked about both reaching out and taking a stand for justice. Finding that balance, finding out how to do the both, and being true to ourselves, to our best principles, and also being kind and compassionate to people who have been, from our point of view, misled is interesting. Somebody referred to a 1776 law on how to treat Tories that said that they should be treated with kindness and compassion.
John Adams.
Thank you. But it's an important question, and it's been around for a while in different forms.
People that are looking to take advantage of the situation and are looking to bully and to hold down other groups are going to keep pushing until they encounter resistance. So the resistance has to be there to teach those people what the acceptable limits are.
What's coming to mind right now is something someone mentioned earlier today. I can't remember who or when, but apparently the person who bombed was responsible for the bombing on
In Nashville.
Christmas
In
Day.
Nashville,
Right.
yeah.
Apparently on his website, there was a picture of him with a Trump hat on, and it didn't say "Make America Great." It said "Make liberals cry." And that's sort of the seed of it. So it's not political, it's not policy, or maybe it's political, it's not policy. It's what's upsetting people is, I don't know, but it's apparently a symptom of this thing is that we whine if people get hurt, or we whine as liberals. We are upset about people being hurt. And so I wonder about that. How is it threatening to people that we care about what happens to other people?
Well, you have to wonder where that person got their information from. What were
Yeah.
their, what was influencing how they thought, and was there something that took the term liberal and kind of made that into the boogeyman, for this particular individual?
Yeah, yeah, that's been going on for so long. I hate that it's become a pejorative. And I keep trying to think of another to turn it around. Like, I mean, the radical actions that are going on right now on the right, saying, oh, we can just overturn the election, is just insanity. But one of the things, like when they're showing the Fox News is going down in viewership because some of the people have started saying Biden won. And it was all fair and it's all right. So they get mad at Fox and turn on Newsmax or one of these other weird ones, OAN, I think it is. So, yeah.
I went,
It's just,
sorry.
you don't want to hear the other message.
People are very committed to the structure that they think the universe should have.
Yeah.
And they will do anything. They will deny the evidence of their own senses in order to hang on to that structure sometimes. Now, how they got that structure and why it's so unfortunate and what can we do about it is a whole different question. But this is a very old process. And you think about religious fanatics who will, be burned at the stake rather than give up what they think are the right words about what happens during communion. Or people who are willing to burn other people at the stake because they have the wrong words about that.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I went to the grocery store, and when I came home, there was a group of about 5 people with signs, and they were screaming and yelling and using those noisy horns that, you use at a football game. And the signs were, there's still time, Trump won. So it's alive and well here. But I did notice a lot of people driving by and not looking, which is what I did.
But I think what Rick said about having a backstop, there's no backstop with your Republican Party right now, it seems.
No.
Even Pence is questioning the outcome of the election. I mean, giving credence to that. So there's no backstop yet. And maybe when Biden gets in and things start rolling and things start looking up and people are, the vaccine is being rolled out, good things are happening, maybe some of this will die down.
But it'll be interesting to see how many roadblocks are thrown up.
Oh.
But yeah, it's scary, and it's been scary for quite a while. And and they say it's much more a rural, urban divide. And part of that is those of us who've lived in urban areas, we've experienced diversity all our lives. So the changing demographics don't mean anything. I mean, I remember being back home in Chicago a few years ago, and I was walking, it's a wonderful walking city. And I was walking down State Street and going to Marshall Fields, and I can't tell you how many different languages I heard. One of which was not English. I was walking down the street
Didn't hear
and
it
I
either.
didn't hear English being spoken. I was hearing Spanish and what I think was Polish and Italian, and I mean, all kinds of different languages, but nobody was actually speaking English.
Which means that if you speak an obscure language, don't count on its being obscure because somebody in the crowd might well understand it.
Exactly,
You know,
exactly.
there is
Actually, I was in line at the DMV and I was talking in German.
about having to, oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
I talked about having to stand our ground and insisting that rocks don't fall up, they fall down. And I think that's important, but I just want to say on the other side, there's a lot of discussion about how those who had so-called privilege are upset because their so-called privilege is being reduced. You know, there is this old line that those who are oppressed don't want to see an end to their oppression. They want to become the new oppressors.
Sometimes that happens.
And sometimes that happens. And I think there's a fear of that. And we have to be careful, us liberals, that we don't give the impression that we want to become the new oppressors. I'll leave it there for now.
I'd like to see somebody, a social psychologist, explain the parallels between what sometimes happens in abusive families, that the child who has been abused grows up to become the abuser. I'd like to see the parallel between that and what happens among large groups. I don't think it's inevitable in either case, but sometimes that does happen.
You know, many of the Trump supporters in rural areas that have done poorly economically are not doing that. We all know this. We all know this. Are not doing that well, and are not and resent being characterized as having privilege, when so many of them have a very tough situation, a very tough life. So that's the other side that I want to just us to always remember that. And maybe you already did, but I just need to say it.
Well, I'm not sure it's the other side. It's one of the layers, and there's lots of layers.
I'd like to say that there, if we think of privileged as something that some people have and some people don't have, and that we've all earned our privilege by walking on other people or stepping on other people, that there's something we're missing, because I have come to realize how privileged I am to be able to isolate in a separate home, even however rude it is. It's a fact that I can go away from what I think is a dangerous situation, and people who just have a little bit less money than Gary and I have don't have that option if they're living in multi-generational homes. So I'm privileged not because I think I deserve it. I'm privileged. I have this privilege of being able to make this decision that other people don't have. And lucky. On the other hand, I feel right in the middle, because I also, you know, my little family that's there doesn't have the privileges that I have. That came with no health care, that came with housing, having trouble finding housing. So I'm seeing that in its different forms, privilege in its different forms.
Yeah.
One that I don't necessarily feel I deserve. It's not privilege that I demanded. I'm just lucky enough to
Some things fill
have
your
another
plate.
place to go. It's cold here, though. It's snowing and cold. My feet are cold, but
Someone
Well,
pointed
I've
out,
got on 2 pairs of socks and some heavy slippers.
someone pointed out that white privilege doesn't mean that your life isn't hard. It just means that it isn't hard because of race.
Yeah.
right there.
And of course, people grow up with all kinds of combinations of privilege and oppression. You could grow up white and rich, but be in an alcoholic family in a way that's very damaging to you. Or you could grow up in an oppressed community, but still have marvelous parents and good support and luck into the education that enables you to change the economics of your life. But this question of privilege is not so much about my situation in my life, but what are the general things happening, and they're complicated.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I
one-
told my sister one time, I said, you know, we were very privileged in our upbringing. And she's like, what? And because my dad was a professor, and I look back, I found some of the old tax returns. It's like, wow, how did he get by on that? And
Because
when we
bread cost
went,
a quarter, not $6.
well, when we went to Mexico on all these long driving trips, his budget was 100 pesos a night, which was $8. That's what he had to find the room for $8. And which is why the first time I ever saw a cockroach, it was about that big. And there were 2 of them. It's like, oh, there's a big black thing. It's really interesting. And they're like, oh my God. But we got to do those. We did those things, and we did them on a budget. But the other thing was, they were in, my folks, dad was a PhD who used the doctor, by the way. And my mom was actually a 3rd generation college graduate on her father's side. So we grew up with where college was expected, where we knew intelligent people. I mean, it's why I kind of, when people go, oh, so-and-so's got a PhD, I'm like, yeah, because I knew so many of them.
And some of them were jerks.
Well, no, you know what? No, the ones he knew were, none of them were jerks, but they were.
I've known PhDs who were jerks.
Oh, so have I. We've this whole crew has met a couple. But one person in particular I'm thinking of. But what I did learn was, you know, you can't be in awe because they're every bit as nuts as the rest of the world. And you know, sometimes it's like, were you standing behind the door when they handed out the common sense? So
I heard someone, I think it was a TED Talk. It was a person of color talking about what the good things are about being a person of color. She said that in her community, that she felt lucky and privileged because wherever she goes in the country, when she was a graduate student or something, and sort of just kind of making it and traveling around to visit things and go to things. Wherever she went in a town, if she could find the Black neighborhood, she knew that she would be warmly welcomed and taken care of. And I thought, wow, that is so not where I came from, you know?
But that's true about being the default white person. But if you found yourself in trouble in a small town in New England and you found the Unitarian Church, you would get help.
That's probably true, but I don't know that a lot of people know that.
Well, they don't. But I mean, when you're part of a minority community or an oppressed community, those folks notice each other and take care of each other because they have to. And I think that's what Stephen Colbert was saying, that we're all in that situation now and we have to take care of each other. But I noticed in the seminary, there would be maybe 40 or 50 people in the classroom. And when a Black student came in, he or she would notice every other Black student in the classroom and make eye contact with them because they were maybe 20, 25%. And I noticed every Unitarian Universalist in the classroom because we were about 4%.
How can you tell a Unitarian Universalist?
Because I knew them all individually
Oh,
because we were such a tiny community.
Yeah.
And so we'd go out during the break, we'd go out in the hall and would say, now what are we going to do about this? Because they just said something outrageous theologically. And of course,
oh, yeah.
it was a Methodist seminary. And of course, they were going to teach Christian doctrine. That was their job. But our job was to how do we respond to it in a way that is helpful, respectful, and still enables us to take our stand. And Alan, that's what you had been saying. It was a much less fraught situation in seminary than it is right now politically.
Yeah.
But there is that happening. And I think that it was valuable for the school and for my Christian classmates to have some heretics among them. And it was valuable for us heretics to learn how to function in a Christian environment
Right.
and to learn what was valuable and good about Christianity. So the working and living and loving across those lines is healthy. It's good for us. It's challenging sometimes.
Justine, you tried to say something a while ago, but the sound wasn't good on your, do you want to say what you had to say?
I think it was because I had Bluetooth earphones in. Is it better now?
Yes.
Yes,
fine.
yes.
Okay, great. Oh, I was just saying, because Mary talked about the different languages and you can never know like who understands you. So I was in line at the DMV and it was a long line. I was in line for 5 hours. So I called some friends in Germany and talked to them. And behind me was an Asian couple. And I mean, obviously I did not think they would speak German, but apparently the guy lived in Germany for 3 years. And I mean, I didn't say anything bad or anything, but he could understand every word I was saying. And I did not expect that, but that just,
Brilliant.
is, again, you never know.
There's
Yep.
a lovely section in the New York Times called Metropolitan Diary where they tell little stories like that. And I read one years ago about someone standing in line and this couple are talking in Serbo-Croatian. And they're commenting on one thing or another and not very nice. And they talked about that old cow over there. And as they were finally finished and leaving, the old cow came up and spoke to them and said every word.
Gosh.
Yeah, I was in a store one time and I can't remember, I said to something because I was trying to get something and I was not getting the proper service. And he went over and I knew, I could tell by the accent, he spoke Spanish, but I didn't know the other person in the store did. And they're speaking Spanish and he's saying some not very nice things to him. And I just turned around and said, "Puedo entender todo lo que dicen." And he just looked at me, which meant I can understand everything you're saying. And the look on his face when I did that was like, oh. But I don't know if I've told this group. Mom worked with a woman who was Italian, and her father had immigrated with his family as a little boy to Chicago, and then lived in Little Italy. And when they got there, it was summertime, and he was outside playing, and he was playing with other kids in the neighborhood, and he was learning English. And so nobody else in the Spanish family spoke English at all. And so when he came into the house, I came home and they were having some friends over who'd lived in Chicago for a while, a few months later. And they said, well, and I don't know what the kid's name was, said, "Oh, he speaks English. Show them how you speak English." And he starts talking and saying something. And they're like, that's not English. No, he'd been playing with the Polish kids. So we spoke Italian and Polish. So, you know.
I didn't mean to hijack the coffee hour, by the way.
Oh, should I take I was wondering if the
And-
chalice is
And
still going.
I failed to include chalice extinguishing words,
Okay.
but here we are, moving that flame from the literal flame into the metaphoric flame that we carry with us.
And I have it nice and big so y'all can see it.
Do you have snow down there?
Yes.
I'm gonna end the recording now.
Yeah.
It's snowed a little bit this morning.